There we go.
Because I'm looking at my iPad going, we're on.
All right, we'll be okay now.
Okay.
It's gonna be fine, Gary. It's gonna be fine. Yeah, I'm getting my second shot on the 19th, Joe.
Are you? Okay, folks, technical sloppiness here tonight, but we're all here. Jennifer in the top or left, Beth top right, Cathe bottom right. So, yeah, a little more behind the scenes than we wanted you to have, but nobody was picking their nose, so we're okay.
That's good.
Thanks for joining us tonight. Our second Thread Talk with Cathe. Cathe's got a table full of stuff laid out there. We're gonna have a good ride tonight. So looking forward to that. Got to start out though with a sad one. Deb DeCrane lost her dad yesterday. Our good friend Deb, who is here just about every time, lost her dad yesterday. So if prayer is part of what you do, add her and her family to your list. Kind of a sudden thing, and some kind of an accident, and he was in the hospital, and he passed away. So pray for Deb and her family, please. They need it. Yes, they need it. Yeah. So, okay, on to other things then. Remember now the Spring Hill, Jennifer, hold yours up. The Spring Hill Stitch Along still can get your kits, but good luck catching up to Jennifer. WeTalkFiber.com/SpringHill, and Cathe Ray will fix you up with kits. I don't have mine here handy, but I can show you that I have gotten up the side and across the top with the vine, so you can catch up to me quickly. Still.
Yes.
Yes. Still, if you want to contribute photos that I can use on the Wednesday videos, I'd appreciate it. Put your name on them if you know how, and if you don't, I'll do it for you. Then remember we had Marion Lang that Sassy Jacks was offering for free, that was going to be no longer free after tonight. Kim has extended that to the 28th, so next Wednesday night. So you can still download that sampler for free at WeTalkFiber.com/Lang, and then /Lang kit will get you the kits, and WeTalkFiber.com/SpringHill gets you to Cathe's website to get the Spring Hill kits. And then We have the Joanna Kabanoff's Take Wing Sampler stitch along will be starting May 2. We'll have more stuff on that in the coming shows. And then Sunday's guest, Lindsay Olson. If you listen to, we talked about it a bit in the podcast today, Beth and I, really a fascinating designer who works with scientists and then gets designs out of that. And it's a fascinating world that she does. So catch that on Sunday. And that's it. That's it, I think. Fire away your questions. Jennifer and Beth are here to handle the questions, and Cathy's here to edumacate us. So that's it. That's all I got. So Cathe, I'm going to switch over to your table and let you have at it. Go get them.
Okay. So last time I covered kind of the, as I call it, 50,000 foot view of many of the threads on the market. And this time I wanted to talk a bit about the importance of needles with your thread, as well as not so much the importance of fabric, but how you decide what you want to stitch on with a particular thread. So needles really serve several purposes. My husband says the first one is to poke people. But it's, you know, its primary purpose is obviously to carry a thread. So it's what you put your thread in. This is Appleton tapestry wool, which I'm going to untwist a bit here. And, you know, you could certainly shove thread through a kind of hole that you made in some kind of fabric. But as you can tell, needless to say, eons ago, people decided that there was a better way to do that, and that was to actually use needles. Many of the first needles were actually bone needles. In fact, if you want to go searching for something really strange, in 2004, I did a Mythbusters episode with them that was actually about how hard was it to find a needle in a haystack. And one of the things I gave them were bone needles because I knew that would create a problem for them, which was kind of my purpose.
Did they find the needle?
Well, they did it in teams. Both of them divided up their team in half and decided to do different methods to try to find the needles I gave them. So I gave them tapestry needles, beading needles, and bone needles because I knew they would go for magnets. Mm-hmm. Which would grab all the metal needles, but it wouldn't grab the bone ones. So if you go find the episode, it's really quite entertaining how they had to find them. They did eventually, but they pretty much had to process an entire haystack to find them. It was, in fact, a lot harder than they thought it was going to be. Yeah, it was pretty fun. So finding the right needle, a lot of us just kind of go and grab a needle that's, stuck in our stash and go, yeah, whatever. And that's not to say that that's not okay, but it's not always optimal depending on what's in your stash. So if you're stitching with embroidery fabric and all you have is a tapestry needle, you're going to struggle because a tapestry needle is really blunt. This is a number 22. I'll lay it there so you can kind of see. And it's, it's pretty sturdy. It's made for, I use it on 18 mesh canvas. And if I use this on a regular fabric that's not got holes in it, it's really hard to shove it through. I can do it, but it's just really painful and my life is too short for that. So make sure that you think about not just the shape of the needle, the eye of the needle, and the size of the needle, but also whether it's sharp or not. So the components of it are whether it's blunt, whether it's sharp. So beading sharps, embroidery needles, chenille needles, those are sharp. Most sewing needles are obviously sharp. Tapestry needles are really the only ones that are always blunt. You can get some blunted ended beading needles. John James actually makes one. We sell quite a bit of them because they're still a little sharp, but they're not quite as sharp as the sharp ones are. And then you want to look at the shape of the needle. So the difference is tapestry needles. If you take a look at one, let's see if I can do it on my hand where it's a little easier. So it starts out narrow at the bottom. It gets wider the higher up the shaft it goes. And the widest point is actually the middle of the eye. Now, this really helps a lot when you do needlepoint, because if you've ever worked on a needlepoint canvas, or if you've ever contemplated it, if you feel the edge of the canvas, it is super, super rough. And that means when you cut it, that part is exposed to your thread. So you want a needle that's got a wide shaft at the top and a wide eye, because it not only needs to carry the thread, it needs to take that canvas and it needs to push it slightly open so that the needle will go through it and not shred the thread. So if you've ever worked with a metallic on needlepoint or anything else that's really rough, and you go, holy crap, this stuff is just falling apart, it's because you're probably using a needle that's too small. So my trick is to find the optimal thing is stick your needle into the canvas, and you want it to get stuck either at the base of the eye or at the middle of the eye. You don't want it to fall through. So this thing is stuck. It's not going anywhere. I actually have to pull it to get it through. And that's really the purpose. So what happens is when I do this, it's hard to tell in a video, but if you do it on your own, it will actually push those canvas threads just ever so slightly apart. And that will help with not shredding the thread. Not so critical for something like wool, which is kind of, rough anyway. But if you're doing it with silk or something that's got a really smooth surface, or even one of the metallics, whether it's, a Krynic, a Rainbow Gallery, a Bellswah, whatever, it will help keep it from shredding. And then the shape of the eye is different. So again, Tapestry Needle has an elongated eye, which matches kind of the way, actually, I'm going to take the thread out because it'll be easier to see the eye. So it's got a much elongated eye there. Now, this is really beneficial as a stitcher because A, it means you can fit fatter threads in it, and B, it also means that it's a lot easier to thread it. So whether you use a needle threader or whether you just, have your own methodology, lick the lick it, stick it through it, fold it over. There's a lot of options for that. Yeah, spit on it, whatever. That really makes a difference. And then things like Milner's needles. So these are the Bowen Milner's needles, but John James makes them as well. And I think R.H. Hemming, a bunch of different needle companies make them. These are a completely different shaped needle. So this is the shaft is the same diameter. Once you get about a 1/16 of an inch up from the tip, it's the same diameter the entire length of it, including the eye. And this is really critical if you're going to do stuff like bullion knots. Because bullions, you wrap around this and then you're pulling the thread through the things you've wrapped, which means if the eye is wider, you can't pull it through and the whole bullion just comes apart. So if you've ever tried to do bullions with anything other than a Milner's needle and you thought that you were going to go insane, try a Milner's needle. I know this from personal experience. So this is the difference in what they look like. So the tapestry has got it would help if my hand would actually hold them. There. So you can tell that you've got quite a bit of difference between the tapestry and the Milner's needle. And the Milner's needles are also usually really thin. You can get some thick ones. Tulip, which is a Japanese company that makes needles, they actually make some thicker Milner's than most of the other ones I've seen. So if you needed, a big one, John James makes really long, they're like this long, what they call bullion needles, which are for needlepoint. And they're like about 6 or 8 inches long.
Holy
and they're
smokes.
really intended specifically for needlepoint. Yeah, I'll see. Karen?
Don't take one of those on an airplane.
Can you bring me one of the bullion
Okay,
needles
so those are
down on the bottom?
okay, and those are from, excuse me, they're from John James, because I know someone who's looking for those.
Yeah, let me.
And they're called bullion
we've got
needles?
some. Yeah, they're called bullion needles.
Okay.
Here they are. Thank you. Yeah, actually, it's Colonial Needle who does them. Colonial Needle is
Okay.
actually the distributor for John James in the United States. So that's the packaging.
Okay.
There is a tapestry point, like a tapestry needle, and there is a sharp point, like a chenille needle. So it depends on what you're going to do with it. But if you're going to do this for needlepoint, just get the blunt ones, because the sharp ones are really kind of sharp and they will, in fact, hurt you if you're not careful. But this is how long they are. No, go ahead. You can ask your questions. I'm trying to get this package open.
Question. So if you're doing it on like fabric, like we're talking like Kona cotton, you'd get the sharp ones though, correct?
Yes, you would get the sharp ones. Well, yeah, Milner's by default are sharp. If you just buy a plain Milner's, then this is the super long one. Okay.
Right.
So this is like 7 1/4 inches long.
Wow.
That's how long this is, one needle. It looks kind of like a darning needle, if you've ever seen darning needles. And it is a little different because the eye in this is slightly wider than the shaft is, but it's not near as much as a tapestry, so it still works pretty well. I mean, you're going to do with this kind of needle and how thick it is, this would be like the equivalent of about a number 22. You would do a really chunky thread with this. You wouldn't be doing a strand of silk. You would be using maybe trebizond or wool or, pearl 5 or something. So you just kind of gauge it based on that. And this particular
I use those
set
for tamari.
Yeah, you could use them for tamari as well. And so this set comes with a 3.5 inch, a 5 inch, and a 7 inch. So you can kind of gauge it based on what you're doing. My needlepoint people tend to use the 3.5 one, not so much the really big ones. They're useful for other things, but not quite so much for needlepoint. And then you get sharps, which are the things that you typically find in quilting stores. Sharps are betweens. And again, it has to do with the shape of the needle and the shape of the eye. And they are typically, once I get one of these out of here, they're also usually pretty short, shorter than the Milner's are. And their eye is actually pretty small. So this would be something where if you were going to do embroidery and you didn't have an actual embroidery needle, the eye is a slightly less full than an embroidery one is, but it's pretty close. So they'll do in a pinch. And again, they're super sharp, which is why you typically find them for quilting things. And then, there's beading needles. They come in a whole variety of sizes. This is the John James set. Let's see if I can tilt that so you can actually see it. That's their 5 through 10. So it's a different set of sizes, 10 being the smallest. So these work really nicely for not just beading. I actually use them for embroidery sometimes too, when I want to be able to use a thinner thread and the tapestry needle or even a chenille, the eye is just a little too big. So very similar to the others, a fairly straight shaft, a slightly elongated eye, but not near as much as a tapestry needle is. And the difference between a chenille needle and a tapestry needle, they are physically the same except for the point. A chenille is always sharp and a tapestry is always blunt. So if you're doing ribbon embroidery, so if you're going to do something like, this is Silk Road Fibers straw silk. This is actually a silk raffia. So it's made like the raffia that you do like packaging with, but it's actually made out of silk. It's really cool to do embroidery stuff with, and a lot of needle pointers use it to add 3-dimensionality to their projects. I would use a chenille with it, or a tapestry if it's actually needlepoint. And if I'm doing silk ribbon embroidery, so this is one of the Gloriana silk ribbons, I use a chenille. And the reason I do that is because I like that it's got an elongated eye. And unless I'm doing something super tiny, if I were doing really tiny French knots, I might. But even with a 4mm ribbon, you can't really quite do super tiny French knots. So that's kind of the basics of the needles. So if you ever feel like you want to just get some and try some, you can see what works best for you. And then I'll talk about the sizes, but you have a question.
Yeah, go back to when you put the needle in and it stops just before the eye. And then talk a little bit about using the feel of that needle going through the canvas to determine if it's big enough or you need it bigger, and how that relates to the thread, so people can gauge whether they need to go to a bigger thread or a bigger needle.
So I'm going to show this again on the needlepoint canvas just because it's easy to tell. This in my hand is a number 24 tapestry needle, which is way too small for needlepoint for 18 mesh canvas. So I'm going to hold this from the back because it's going to fall through.
And Cathe, can you hold it away from you more? There, a little more.
Yeah, I'm going to see if I can. And I just lost the needle again. Okay, hang on. Okay, so if I take this number 24 tapestry needle and stick this in this canvas, it fell right through. I didn't even touch it, and now it's laying on the thing by my scissors. So that is way too small. It's not going to give you any oomph that you need to be able to move those canvas threads apart. This is a 24, and so it's going to get stuck, right about the bottom of the shaft. It's kind of doable. You could probably make it work. I don't happen to like it because it's too easy to pull it through. And then this is a 22, and so the 22 gets stuck right at the bottom of the shaft. And then when I pull this, I can actually, if I twirl this needle, once I've gotten it to the middle of the eye, I can actually see it move the canvas threads apart. And because canvas will stay in position until you use a thread to push the other threads next to it away, you can actually see that it will create a hole. So again, kind of really hard to show in a video, but if you're having trouble with your needles, maybe try a size larger, just to see if that's going to help you with it. Did that help?
Yeah. So there should be a pretty good little tug as you pull that eye through that.
Yeah, you don't want it to be too big. So for example, this is a 20, this is an 18. So this is the size needle I would use on 13 mesh canvas. Mm-hmm. If I put this in the 18, see, it got stuck at the bottom of the it got stuck at the bottom of the needle. So that's just way too big. You will struggle mightily to get it through, and then stitching won't be any fun, and you'll be really annoyed at it. It can be useful if you're trying to do something like, let's say I need to create a hole in this. I might actually use it for that. Okay. Because if I have to shove something in there, I might use a bigger needle just to kind of create a hole that I can then, shove something, and you can actually see that hole now because it was such a large needle. Mm-hmm. So, just keep in mind that needles serve multiple functions. And then kind of try to gauge them for what you're after. If you're going to do the really dense stuff. So this is 5260 linen. I will lay that there. Even a 28 is a little bit thick for it. I can do it and it'll work okay, but I tend to like using like a number 10 beading needle, which I think is what Jean uses. I think Jean might be the one who coerced me into using a number 10 beading needle, because you actually get it, because it will go through it, because you can tell this is stuck. Mm-hmm. So if you wanted to have a little bit more of an opening, you can use it. This particular linen, most of the linens made for cross stitch are a lot smoother, and they're not as rough on threads as things like needlepoint canvases. So again, you kind of want to gauge it to the type of fabric you're working with. And you might be working with, say, a chunky burlap kind of fabric doing embroidery, which is going to behave very different than Kona cotton. So for those who don't quilt or do embroidery, Kona cotton is one of the premier 100% cottons that quilters use, but it also gets used a lot for people doing embroidery, because it's it's not a really dense, it's a dense fabric, but it's not really heavy. And it works really nicely, particularly with stuff. So kind of play with what works for you. For this, I tend to like a smaller needle just because this is a little too big. It's also a little too big because it's harder for me to actually find the hole. That's the other thing, is that when you're stitching on a really dense fabric, if your needle is too thick, you'll have a harder time actually finding the hole in the space between the threads to be able to get it through, which many times frustrates people because then they're going, well, okay, so why in the world can't I get this thing to work? So this is a 28, so it's a little bit better. And then let me find my number 10 beading needle, which I laid in here somewhere. Actually, I'm just going to use one of my, so even my Milner's is a little bit too big. It's nice and sharp, but it's a little bit too big. So I think for this, I would go back to using a number 10 beading needle, because I think that would actually give a really good, I've managed to lose it on my desk here. It'll, I think, give you, oh, no, there it is. It's just stuck on one of my mini magnets.
So when you get up in the 50 count linens, then you need to really start looking at a beading needle as your primary needle.
Yeah, because the shaft is thinner. This is a number 10. You can go up to a 12 or a 15, but they're really bloody hard to thread, which is the other thing you have to take into consideration, is like, how hard is it going to be for you to get the needle in it, the thread in it? We sell a number 15 restoration needle that people use to do really fine stitches in work they're doing restoration work on, so that you don't get a pronounced hole from a needle. And I only have one threader. I think it's the double-ended clover one. I only have one threader that's actually small enough to be able to get into the eye, and I can't thread it without the threader, which for me is kind of rare. So just, kind of play with the needles to see what gives you the best look for what you're doing. And if you do stitch with a sharp needle on this kind of fabric when it's counted, it will take a little time to learn to not also then grab your thread and pierce it as you're going through when there's already existing thread in a hole. If you're used to working with a tapestry needle, you'll find that there's a learning curve to go, oh, that's not working quite the way I thought. I have to, if I don't do it for a while, I have to do some practice stitches to kind of remember, to get the muscle memory back into my head and my hand, so that I don't accidentally stick it through the thread as I'm also trying to stick it through the fabric.
So what I'm taking about out of this then is there are general, like so many things, there are general guidelines for needle size and thread count. And then you just adjust according to the thread you're using and your own personal preferences within a degree. But, so there's still some give and take within the size, the recommended size, if you will.
Yeah, it's like, and there's no really, I wouldn't say that there's even any really right answer, in the sense that if you use the wrong thing, you're going to get bad result. You're going to be, something's going to go wrong. It's more that what I find is that for people who are frustrated because they're trying to get, something through a really thin fabric, and they're using a needle that's way too big, and they can't figure out why it is that they're struggling. I have a number that I see that more often with needle pointers than I do with cross stitchers or embroidery people. But I have quite a few needlepoint people who will come in and say to me, oh, I'm having struggles with blah, blah, blah. And it's like, what size needle are you using? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is, I don't know.
Oh.
And so I show them the right one, and they're like, oh, yeah, no, clearly I'm not using that. so go ahead.
Well, Mary Dorter wanted to know, what if her hands are irritated when she does canvas work. So do you have a suggestion for a needle for that, or is it?
Well, your hands getting irritated when you do needlepoint is just a function of the fact that needlepoint canvas is just really abrasive. It's like, so if you run your hand across the top of this thing, there's a really, it's not even nubbly. That's not really quite the term. There's definitely a very grabby texture to it. And so it does wear on your hands after a while if you're like, you're constantly moving the side of your hand against it. I wear half gloves. Let me go grab mine. And I don't wear them for that reason. Let me go grab them off my desk. I get them off of Amazon. I have a cyst on one of my wrists, and because I spend so much time typing, if I don't wear them. So I have a cyst that's right here on my wrist, and it's not like it's anything bad, but it's really sensitive skin there. So I wear these. So they're kind of like the hand warmers you see some places. These are not the handies kind of thing where you're really trying to get compression. They're slightly compression, but they're not really that much. And so they work really well for being able to do, for me still be able to stitch and then not have it be quite so rough. Did the camera freeze?
Yes, it did.
Okay, hang on. I don't know why it did that. Let me switch it to the cell signal and see if that makes the problem go away.
Yeah, it's been having trouble keeping up.
Sometimes on the Wi-Fi it will freeze after a while. See, it should come back. At least I hope it will come back.
So I bought your
Okay,
silk
hang on.
samplings kit, and you
we
included the Bowen Big Eye between needles, and I really liked using that.
Oh, I know it's wrong. Okay. Too many things. Did it come back, Gary?
It looks like it. Yeah, move your hand under it or
Kinda.
something. There we go.
Oh, I think I got hung up. Gary,
Yep.
did it come back?
It looks like it, but I'm sensing it's frozen. Yeah, it's
No, it's not now. No, it was that I forgot to plug the phone in to my power,
Oh.
and it was starting to die.
Oh.
Oh no.
Apparently when it does that, it decides to freeze. So these are the gloves that I wear. I get them off of Amazon. They come in like, I don't know, 5 different colors, including purple and brown, and these are the gray ones. And I like them because my fingers are still free and I can actually stitch with these. So if my hands get really cold, I can stitch with them. But it does help with, if you're using one of these, you know, if you're having trouble with your hands getting really rough with canvas, it takes the brunt of that as opposed to your skin taking the brunt of it.
Okay,
So I would say
the
maybe try
problem
something
wasn't
like that.
I think the problem isn't the abrasiveness, it's the actual pulling of the needle.
Then she's
You know, how
probably, well, if the needle is too big, then you'll have that problem. Whether the needle's too big or too small, you can actually have that same problem. So it's one of those
Okay.
Goldilocks things. If it's too small, then what happens is that you're trying to concentrate. So if you're trying to pull, say, tapestry, which is this stuff, if you're trying to pull this through needlepoint canvas and your needle is too small, then what's going to happen is it gets all bunched up at the end of the needle, and you're trying to literally pull it through. And if the needle's too big, then you're trying to pull the needle itself through. So again, it's that kind of Goldilocks thing. So what canvas is she stitching with, and what size needle?
Okay. All right.
So we'll come back to
a couple
that.
more questions.
Mhm.
Okay, a couple more questions. One, will you talk a little bit, maybe not right now, but about how tight of a fiber count can you use and still use the little tiny Mill Hill beads? And then are there different levels of quality in the needle brands?
Yes, for the second part, yes. It has to do with the plating. So you can get the gold plated ones from John James. So a couple of things. Most needles that are manufactured today are nickel plated. So if you have a nickel allergy, then you have to use one of the gold plated ones. The platinum plated ones that Kreinik used to make years ago, they don't make anymore, and nobody else makes them. So there's a bunch of reasons why you might have some issues with the quality of the needle, and it's usually about the thickness and the type of the plating. So if you find that your skin chemical nature eats through plating in the normal needles, so if you've been using, say, DMC, which is an okay quality, it's not that fabulous, try a John James or a Bowen. I happen to like the Bowens better. I think they're smoother. You might still eat through the plating, but maybe not as much. You might find that you need to use the gold ones because of the fact that your chemistry isn't going to interact with the gold. It still might remove the plating a bit, but it's probably not going to remove it as much as it does with the other stuff. But yeah, there is definitely a difference in quality. I mean, you can go buy, you know, decent needles at Joann's or Michael's or, you know, any place like that. But if you're going to be doing a lot of stuff, then I tend to stick with the 3 brands we sell are John James, Tulip, and Bowen. And Tulip is the Japanese ones, and they are the priciest of them. And their plating is much nicer than anybody else's, and they're way smoother. But you pay like, you know, $8.50 for like 6 needles as opposed to $2.75. So, you know, it's kind of one of those, do you want the Maserati? In some cases you might, because that might be what you need. Yeah.
Mhm.
Or you might just like the Maserati. So, you know, who knows?
Yeah,
Right.
And
I
then
was
what
going to
was
go
the
with
first?
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then what was the first part of the question about fabric?
Okay, so how tight can the fiber count be? And I think she meant like how tight of a weave, and can you use and still use the tiny Mill Hill beads? Like,
Well, those are actually unrelated things. So the question for there is really what size needle do you need to get through the beads? You could use number 6 or number 8 Mill Hill, those really super chunky things on a 5260 canvas. Or 5260 linen. It's just that it's going to take up a lot of spaces in comparison to, say, whatever cross stitch you're doing on it. You generally, for most people, they want to scale the bead size to the stitching size, and that's not necessarily a function of count, particularly not if you're doing embroidery. So if you want to do, say, the Mill Hill seed beads, and you want to be able to do them on Kona cotton, which is not a counted fabric, and if it were, it'd probably be like, I don't know, 300 count or something. You could use a number 11 and it'd be fine. You just would need to make sure that you're spacing them enough side by side so that they're not trying to overlap. So it just really depends on what you're doing. For needlepoint canvas, the same thing. Typically size 11s work the best on either the 11s or the petites, which are in a size 14 or 15. Those work best on the 18 mesh if you're trying to pack things really quite tight together, and the 11s or the 6s and the 8s work on the less dense stuff. So it's kind of a trial and error thing because it depends on what you're looking for. Now, if you're doing a Mill Hill kit, so they sell a lot of little beading kits, and they're done on, in many cases, perforated paper. And the perforated paper is the right size for typically usually the 11s, the standard ones. So it's kind of, like I said, just kind of trial and error. There's no really right or wrong answer. It just depends on the technique. Depends on what you're doing with it and what else is around it. So, okay. So that's kind of the rundown of needles. I'm going to show you real quick my favorite threader. This is a Loran threader. It's a really thin steel. They used to be much heavier. I liked them better when they were heavier because they would hold to a magnet more. But the reason I like them is that they're a hook end rather than the typical little wire end. So you've got a big hook end, which would be for your larger tapestry needles, and you've got a small hook end, which you can actually use for some embroidery needles. It won't work for a beading needle. It's a little bit too small for that. The needles are too small for that. And the way this works is, if you look at the construction of this, there's a ridge on this. So you actually go and hang. I stick my threader through the eye and then sit it so that it's now sitting on that ridge. So when I pick this up, my needle is actually stuck on there, and that's by intent. And then to be able to thread it, you just take your thread, leave a tiny tail. You don't really need much of one. So just leave like about a ½ inch or so. And then lift this off the ridge and pull it straight through. Now, what I find is that I sometimes need to rock it. If I'm, not so much, this isn't a very thick one, but if I'm doing like tapestry woven on a 18 needle, just pulling it straight through is really hard. So you rock it, and you just kind of rock it this way, and that will give you enough movement to be able to pull it through. and they will actually stick to a magnet. It sticks better to a couple of magnets. So before the whole, well, actually probably about the time that the whole thing happened with China and the tariffs on steel. I don't know that that's where Loran was getting their steel from, but within about 6 months of that, the next batch of threaders came through was half the thickness of steel. And so these days they don't really stick well to magnets. The old ones I really liked because you could stick them in a magnet and you'd never lose them. There is a hole in here so that you can actually just put a piece of thread through it and tie it onto your, tie it onto the end of your scissors or something so you don't completely lose it. But I like those because they're really nice for most needles. And then I use this really ultra fine threader. This is if you see the Clover ones, this is the company who makes these. It actually makes them for Clover. And it is one of the wired ones, but it holds up really well. Some of the wired ones are just so flimsy.
Yeah, I was going to say the wired ones I've had in short order just basically come apart. So this holds up well then.
I think we lost her.
I think we lost her. We did. We lost her. Cathe, we lost you.
Oh, no.
Yeah, nothing I can do here. Cathe, we lost you. Hello, hello.
No, all right, I'm back.
Oh,
Can you hear me now?
yeah.
Yeah, the Wi-Fi cut out. Every
Oh.
now and then my AT&T Wi-Fi disappears. Yeah, it's just, yeah, that's a whole nother rat hole to go down. So this will actually go through a one of the beading needles, which is quite nice. Okay, so did it come back and actually, I see the thing. No, hang on, it's frozen.
It's frozen, yeah.
Yeah, it's frozen again. Hang on. The joys of technology. Okay, let's try that back. Try that again. Yeah, it's got the last picture it took, but it's not picking up the signal again. Hang on. I'm going to take this out of the stand for a sec.
Oh,
Yeah. Hang on.
that'll scare them half to death.
No. Yeah, sorry about that. I was just trying to get it to reconnect.
Oh, here we go.
Did it come up? Yeah, I'm not seeing it. Oh, there we go.
Yep.
Okay. Well, what's weird is that I can't actually. Sorry, guys, for the problem with this. Oh, and then my phone just completely shut down. Well, that was interesting.
Well, I'm not gonna
Okay.
I'm not gonna be the only one on the screen here.
No, that's okay.
Everybody's got to be on the screen.
Yeah. Well,
Come
as
on,
it turns
Gary.
out, my phone actually completely died.
Oh,
It
that's not
actually
good.
caused my phone to reboot. Hello, people.
Oh,
I'll be back in a moment. Anyway, do you have? Is there a question I can answer while I'm standing here trying to get my technology
Yeah,
to work again?
what was the name of that fine wired threader? Because the ones I've had just come apart.
It's ultra fine
Okay,
threader.
ultra fine.
Ultra fine.
all right. And
yeah.
then someone asked, when I use the metal needle threader for a while, it starts cutting my
The Lorena?
thread.
Oh,
Yes. Do they have
well,
a short
that
use life?
might actually be a function of the fact that because they changed the I'll say it in a second, because they changed the
gauge of the steel.
The gauge of the steel, that might have something to do with it. So yeah. Okay, hang on. I know what it is. It's because my phone. So my phone is actually connected to a to a battery thing that's actually running the power to it. And apparently the battery thing cut out. And so my phone actually died because it had no power.
That'll do it.
The joys of technology. Yeah, I think it's because they changed the gauge of it. Because like this thing is really a lot thinner than the old ones, literally by half. So it does tend to be a bit more like a I'll say it in a second, a bit more like a let's see if that works. I'm just trying to get it to power itself up again.
Get it thin enough and it's almost a knife edge.
Well, yeah, that's the problem, is that you get it thin enough and then it becomes a knife edge. So let me see if this is going to wake up again. I'm going to let it hang here for a second, and then I will come back to that while I talk to you.
Okay.
Because it's got to reboot. And I keep my needles in a whole variety of different things. I'm just waiting for my phone to come back. So I keep them in, various kinds of stuff like these guys, which I actually engrave with my laser these days. You can put it in a little book that's got pages in it. So you can put it in something like that. You can put them in a bag. I mean, you can keep them in the standard stuff that they come with. So there's no right or wrong way to store them. I generally don't store them in my stuff, in my work for very long, because I'm always concerned about whether or not it's going to create a problem with rusting. Now, I've never had that happen, but there's always that chance. So hang on one sec while I plug this in the other one. Switch. Oh, there we go. Okay, let me bring the thing up again. Sorry, people. You have the best laid plans of trying to make sure you actually have all of your ducks lined up, and then something weird happens. Oh, yeah, it's charging again. Okay. Allow, join.
Now this is the juncture where we should be thinking up filler things to fill
Yeah,
the time. And
yeah.
I'm not coming up with a thing. When you're supposed to come up with things to fill time, I come up with nothing.
Yeah,
Complete blank slate.
well, there is that. Okay.
Yeah. Now, see, I use the little. I've always used the little Drits. I think it's Drits.
Yeah.
Round ones.
Yeah, and the other brand of those is called Muriel, which is another, Muriel. That's the ones that Rainbow Gallery sells, but the same kind of thing. Yeah, they're round, and they have a connector at both ends usually.
Yeah, but I'm curious about the ones that you use there, because that seems to have a little more sturdiness to it.
Okay, Gary, it's trying to connect again.
Yep. I got you.
Okay. I'm just trying to get it to go back to the right orientation. Hang on a sec. Yeah, it always takes it a sec before it pays attention to the fact that I've turned it.
There we go.
Okay, there we go. No, hang on.
Oh.
Sometimes the gyrometers that are in the phones, I think sometimes they just make things weird.
Yes.
And I find that for a lot of apps, it doesn't take much. Yeah, sorry, people. Actually, I'll just try and do it that way. See, come on. Yeah, it doesn't want to go back into landscape mode. Yeah, I'm just trying to get it back into landscape mode.
Okay, so someone wants to know, what is the thing you're using to keep the needles in the thread, the wood on your desk?
Oh, you mean, yeah, let me show that in a sec, as soon as I can get this thing turned the right way. If I can't get it turned the right way, Gary, I'll just leave it the way it is, because it looks like it's stuck. Yeah, it just does not want to go into landscape mode. Oh.
Nope, there it went. Yay.
Okay, can you see it now?
Yep.
Yay! It's kind of like, can you hear me now? Only different.
Right. Got it.
Okay. Okay. Oh, geez, Louise. Yeah, like I said, the joys of technology. Sometimes it's just really, my day is full of stuff that involves technology, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So the two things that you asked about. So I've got a couple things here. This is the wood thing. I'm gonna actually take my glove back off. This is looks kind of like a little, almost like a lipstick case, but it's actually a needle holder. They come in rosewood, which is what this one is. They come in rosewood, and they come in ebony, which is what this one is. And then I just engrave them with my laser. I own 3 lasers, by the way, now, not just 2. I got a new fiber laser a couple of weeks ago that allows me to etch metal, so I can actually put things on scissors. So that's what I'm working on at the moment, is trying to perfect the right setting so I can like put names on scissors.
Ooh.
And tweezers
Wow.
Ooh.
and pinzettes and all
nice.
that stuff. So yeah, it's kind of fun. Yeah, kind of fun.
Ooh. There's
And then-
Maserati. There's Maserati for you
And then
right there.
Yeah, and then if you're asking about this thing, this is actually not wood. This is also something I make with my laser. This is actually acrylic. It's 2 pieces of
Oh.
acrylic that are sandwiched together, and I created the pattern so that I could have a tool thing. And then I've got a couple different sizes, and then I put magnets in them so that I can, because I'm always using way so many magnets. And then this is also a little needle book that I make with the laser as well. So it's got little pages on it, and it's painted on both sides, and so you can put needles in it or kind of whatever. But fun things that because I'm always looking for places to keep my needles other than the couch.
Well, that tray thing is really slick because I just spread my tools out on the table, and that's very nice.
Well, I
Yeah.
designed this so that I could actually have places to put my spools. So these are my SWA 100 spools,
Oh, look at that.
and those are my like SWA Perlay spools. Well, actually, these holes will fit the Kreinik ones as well. And then you can fit a bigger set of scissors in the thing. And then I've got like you could put a pin here, because I've done that. You can actually stick a pin there. And then these are small enough that you can put more magnets, or you could put something like the threader there, which is what I had this one, because it fits in that sort of gap. So a lot of times when I'm doing stuff with my laser, it's more thinking about, okay, so if I'm going to create a tool that I want to use, what do I want it for? And then I sell them to other people. So,
Bead trays.
Usually they
we
start-
need bead trays.
usually-
Because
yeah,
aren't
send
those
me a note.
tacky
Well, send
bobs?
me a
They
note,
don't
we'll
sell
talk about
those
that.
anymore.
No, the lady who used to put them together lived north of us up in Napa, and she stopped doing them about a year ago. So yeah.
Yeah, I need a bead tray.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, we'll have that as a separate discussion then. So
Okay.
anyway, so did that cover most of the bases for needles?
I think so. Yep.
Okay. Did anybody else have any questions while we were trying to make them nauseous?
Okay, so 2 things.
Okay.
2 things. One was someone wants to see the rosewood versus the cherry.
Oh,
Your
okay.
little needle
Rosewood
holders.
versus ebony.
Real quick.
Yeah, rosewood versus
Ebony. I'm sorry.
Yeah, this one is ebony. The dark one is ebony. The lighter one is rosewood. And then I engraved
Okay, and then
or you can get them plain.
and where do you sell them? Okay,
They're
so
on the online catalog.
Okay, just where, but can they place a search on?
So if you go to needlestack.com and then go to shop our catalog and look in the needles, they'll be in the needles. They're in the storage part of the needles. And then the
Okay.
tray stuff is in the catalog. It's off the homepage for stuff that I sell under the Floss Queen.
Okay. There you
Okay.
go, people.
Okay. So the next thing I wanted to talk about then was the fact that there are a lot of different weights of threads and sort of guidelines to think about when you're trying to determine what thread to use where. Because a lot of times people are saying, well, I like this thread, but can I use it on that? Well, it depends on whether it's a single strand thread or not. So This is tapestry wool. This is made for 13-14 mesh canvas. You could use it on 10 mesh, but you couldn't use it on 18 mesh because it's way too thick. If you try to go through the canvas, it will just shred it to bits. So that's a case of where, yeah, you can go into a bigger hole, but you can't really go into a smaller hole. There is a reason why Kreinik makes, and Bellswah, who've been making metallic threads for eons, why they make so many different sizes. This is all of the sizes in the Kreinik braids.
Okay, and it froze again.
Oh, hang on. Yep, it did. And it's not giving me an error though. Hang on.
Oh.
Yep, there it
It's
is.
going again though.
Okay.
There, okay.
Maybe it just wanted me to touch it. I don't know. My hand, the question is, yep, okay, you can see my hand. That's
Yep.
the important part. Okay, here we go. So this is all of the sizes of the Kreinik braids. So they make everything from a blending filament all the way up to a number 32 braid, which is for 10 mesh canvas, to 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch, 16th inch and 1/4 inch ribbons. So what you use them for really depends on the fabric. So if you're going to stitch with, say, number 18 needlepoint canvas, you're going to probably use the number 12. It will give you the best coverage for tent stitch on a number 18. Can you use it on different counts? Yeah, you could use it on something. You could use it on a 14, but it's not going to cover well. But it might be a great thread to use if you're going to do multiple passes, like road stitches or something like that. If you're going to do cross stitch and you want to do one, you might want to use a number 4. So a number 4 is about the weight of a strand and a half of floss. It's a little bit thicker than cotton floss, but it's not as thick as 2 strands. So it works really well if you're just going to do straight cross stitch on whatever count fabric you're working on. Because with cross stitch fabric, again, because you got holes, the thread you can use changes because there's already holes in it. That's the other thing to take into account when you're picking threads is, does my fabric already have holes? So if it doesn't, that tends to limit your options some because of the fact that it's going to be a dense fabric and you have to figure out how to get it through there without shredding it. So you wouldn't want to use like a 16th inch ribbon, metallic on Kona cotton, because it would want to shred this apart, or it would make a really big hole in the fabric and it might not seal back up correctly. So I usually recommend, if you've not played with a thread before, usually we all have a margin. So whether it's a pre-purchased, a pre-painted, hand-painted canvas, whether it's a piece of cross-stitch fabric, whether it's embroidery fabric, just place them in the margin. I was having a discussion with somebody a few weeks ago, and they were saying that they had gotten a hold of a really old piece of stitching, and somebody said, oh, well, what was that person doing in the margin? And they said they were just, those are practice stitches. And they were like, really? Yeah, I mean, people make practice stitches. Doesn't matter whether it was 400 years ago or now. So, just kind of gauge it to that. So this is Cork Linen. This is 18 count Zweigart fabric. So the kind of threads you can use on this are a little different than 18 count canvas, because if you notice, the holes are a little different. So needlepoint fabric is more about the size of the holes, and cross stitch fabric is more about the size of the base material, so what it's woven from. So even though these are both 18, I can stitch with trebizond on the 18 mesh canvas. I can actually stitch with a trebizond on the cork, but it will look different because of the fact that the holes themselves are not as big. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's just a function of, you find a thread, you play with it, and you go, yeah, that works for me, because it might work for you, and then it might not work for your neighbor. So a good example of that is, I took a bunch of fabric samples out of the cabinet. People always ask about, what's the difference between Zweigart fabric and Witchelt? those are kind of the two primary ones that most people see on the market for cross stitch fabric, for linens. And the reality is it's the way they're woven, and the sizing that's in them. So Zweigart fabric has some sizing in it. Sizing is what gives it a little bit of stiffness and a nice finish. Witchelt fabric, which is made by Perman, tends to have much more in it. So you can see when I do this, it doesn't really fold. It just sort of rolls, where this has got more drapiness to it. Legacy linens have even more drapiness to that. If you compare both of these, the threads that make up the individual threads in this fabric are thinner than the threads in this. These are both 28 count. This is Witchelt 28 count, that's Cashel. So even though they're both 28 threads to the inch, when you hold them up, this one will be much more transparent than this one will. And that can affect the thread you use, because now you've got more hole space to deal with than fabric space to deal with. So the denser the fabric, sometimes the thinner the thread you can use, just because of the fact that you're not trying to fill up the gap as much. So you might find that on 28 count for cotton, most people use 2 strands, and they use for cross stitch, and they mostly use 2 strands of silk as well. But you might find that if you stitched both of these, stitched an inch or, stitched a 1/2 inch square of both of these, that you might find that they don't look exactly the same because of the fact that the base threads in the fabric are slightly different. So that's another factor in all of it. Now, I don't want to say that to make you think, oh my God, there's all this stuff I have to take into account. It's just one of N factors that affect how we all stitch, and why. So if you look, if you're comparing your work to somebody else's, why your work might not look the same.
I've had a linen that was really thin like that, and what I did, because I didn't like stitching on it and how thin it was, I washed it in really hot boiling water and then ironed it dry, and it tightened it up some and fluffed up the individual fibers so it became tighter.
Well, it will actually shrink it some too. So if you
did shrink a smidge, like a little. I did measure it before and after, and it shrunk it like maybe 1/4 of an inch, not a lot.
Yeah. Well, most of the hand-dyed fabrics spend a fair amount of time in water, either before they're dyed or in the dyeing process. And so if you measure a 32 count hand-dyed linen, depending on who hand-dyed it, if you measure over the course of 6 inches, it will not be exactly whatever the count was. It will be off by a bit because it will have shrunk. It tends to shrink one direction more than the other. You can do that with the really highly sized stuff to get the sizing out. It still won't plump it up as much as one that's just made from naturally thicker linen. And this is the linen that's spun. So all of this stuff, this is, they spin this stuff from the flax crop. They put it on absolutely enormous cones. That's what gets fed to the weaving machines. And so you'll end up with not only thick and thin, that's a whole other discussion. You'll not only end up with some thick and thin in the nature of it because it's a natural fiber, but then you get different thicknesses altogether based on who manufactured that linen thread. So it will vary over time. If you go back and look at Cashel from 25 years ago, it doesn't look the same. The thread that they spun it from was much thicker. It was heavier. If you weighed a yard of it, it would have weighed physically more 25 years ago than it does today. Because over time, one of the ways they get by without having to do really enormous price increases as the crop costs and everything else goes up is they spin it out of slightly thinner threads. So if you go back and look at a really old piece of fabric and go, oh, gee, I really love that. I wonder why they don't make it that way now. That's the reason. So, and the count that it comes in, the type of fabric it is. So this is Lugana. Lugana is a cotton rayon blend. So is Joblin. The difference between them is one of them has 1% more rayon than the other ones. So the Joblin is slightly smoother and a little more drapey than the Lugana is. This has consistent diameter threads that it's spun from, because it's an extruded fiber as opposed to a spun fiber like linen is. So you might find, for a lot of stitchers, they get more even stitches regardless of what thread they stitch with this kind of fabric, because of the fact that they are using something that's a consistent base diameter to it. It's called even weave by most people. That's really not what it is. Even weave means the warp and the weft are the same count. It's just that there's no industry standard name for my individual threads in my fabric are the same diameter. So, that's really what it is. It's even in terms of the diameter of the threads, but you could in theory have an uneven fabric out of this kind of stuff anyway. It's just nobody makes it, but that's kind of the misnomer. A lot of times people will go, well, I want an even weave linen. It's like, well, 90% of it is even weave these days, but if you wanted, I always ask the question, are you talking about warp and weft, or are you talking about thread diameter? And then, so this is another really good example of, this is 20 count, one of the legacy linens. This stuff is super dense. So the base threads it's spun from are super dense, so it's a little harder to see the holes. But the nice thing about that is that it means that you're not really filling up a lot of hole space. You're really covering the surface of it. So it almost behaves a little bit more like an embroidery fabric. So if you're doing cross stitch and you're one of the people who doesn't really like super dense cross stitches, you don't want it to look like you stitched with 3 strands, then you can stitch on a fabric that's got plumper individual threads in the fabric, and you'll get a really nice look on the piece, even though your thread coverage is a little bit less. And there's no right answer to this. It's all personal preference. It's like some people really like stitching with 2 strands on 36 count linen, and I only like stitching with 1. It just depends on what you like. And then you've got things like the Kingston, which over its life changes count quite frequently, and you'll end up with a lot more of the thick and thin stuff. The denser it gets, sometimes the more you see the thick and thin, although it sometimes takes a magnifier to see that. And the denser stuff, so like the Kingston, the 55 and above, those are the ones where you want to use a finer thread. So whether it's Soie 100, Soie Surfine, Tudor silk. So Tudor silk is a 12 strand, but it's half the weight of a normal silk. Each thread is, so it works really nicely on the 55, 65 count stuff. So it just kind of runs the gamut. You can get 30 count linens, which are also still pretty dense. This is one of the legacy ones. Now, these are, this is Tula, which is also a cotton rayon, and this is a 10 count. So if you've gotten to the point where you can't see very well to stitch anymore, and you're thinking, I'm going to have to give it up because I can't see 28 count anymore, then just use a different fabric. It goes from 10 count all the way up to, 50, 52, 60. Don't feel like you have to limit being able to stitch because you can't stitch on what you used to. You still get options for that.
Yeah.
And then there's Linen Aida, which has a slightly different feel than the Cotton Aida does, but it stitches pretty much the same with the threads. And then, you get denser and less dense needlepoint fabric as well. So this is Congress cloth, which is 24 count. This is more like this behaves a bit more almost like a linen in that regard. Some people actually like to use this for doing some cross stitch stuff because it has more body than a linen does. And it's a completely even diameter thread. So this is kind of a weird amalgam of, say, like a, Lugana kind of even weave with it being 100% cotton. So my recommendation for threads is that, kind of start with what you think will work and then play with it. So you can find different weights of different threads. This is Silk Wrap Pearl. Now this is a goldwork thread. This is pearl number 2, which is kind of thin. This is pearl number 4, which is about twice the thickness. And then we've got pearl number 8, and which is really big and chunky and works really nicely. You can actually feed needles down through these. That's one of the things you do with these. So a lot of threads don't come just one diameter, particularly in the needlepoint world. This is Silk Lame. Rainbow Gallery makes it in 3 weights. This is for 13 mesh canvas. So there's 8 strands of silk with 2 strands of filament in it. This is for 18 mesh canvas. This is 4 strands of silk with 2 strands of filament. And this is for cross stitch. And this is 2 strands of silk and 1 strand of filament. So you can find the same color in all 3 weights. So if you go, I saw a friend who was doing needlepoint, and they had this really cool thread, but can I do cross stitch with it? The answer might very well be yes. And the same is true for like Very Velvet. So they do a version for 13 mesh and a version for 18 mesh. Mm-hmm. So for a lot of the threads, they come in different weights. So there's no one right answer. Just kind of depends on what floats your boat and what works for you.
Yep.
So
we get some
that's kind of my
questions in
take
here.
on it.
Good.
Yep.
Yeah, we do. One is what Kryneck would work on the Kona cotton?
I would use it depends on the stitch, but if you were going to do like French knots and stuff, I would use the number 4. So it's about the weight of, like I said, it's about not quite 1.5 strands of floss. So let me get my thumbnail up under here. So you can see that this is actually it's not that thick. So it's about 1.5 strands of floss. So this would work on it. You could use the blending filament, but I quite frankly find blending filament a bitch to stitch with. Mm-hmm. It's just too wiry for me. I prefer Accentuate, which is a machine embroidery thread. It doesn't come in the same color range, but I just find that the blending filament, because it's actually flat. So unlike the braids, which are really round, blending filament is actually like a really super thin ribbon. And that makes it sometimes a little bit harder to work with because of the fact that it makes it much more wiry. But I would say, depending on the stitch, either. Mm-hmm.
I've always mixed my blending filament with with DMC, like some patterns I've done from, the 90s. It was use a blending filament and a DMC together, and it just adds a little something.
Yeah, that was
I've never used it by itself.
For cross stitch, that's probably what most people do. But if you're doing embroidery, then a lot of people use it on its own because it gives you a different look, and it also, because it's a thinner thread, gives you more options for doing. Like if you want to do outlining of some stitch even in cross stitch, you could use a single strand of blending filament as an outlining thread versus using a strand of floss. Yeah.
I never thought of using it alone.
Yeah. No, try it. I think you'll find that you might go, oh, this opens up a whole other rat hole of things.
Yeah.
Okay. A couple more questions to do with the linen. One is, how does the threads Legacy is woven from compared to those with Cashel?
Well, so Legacy is not technically a brand of linen. Legacy is the name that Access Commodities gives the linens that they bring in, and they come from probably 8 or 12 different mills in Europe for the most part. Actually, I think they're all in Europe. Nothing comes from any place else. So it really depends on the manufacturer. And they're generally, though, I find that the Legacy linens, regardless of the count, the mills that Lamora buys them from tend to be using a better quality base linen that it's spun from. And so it's a little smoother, in some cases a lot smoother, and it tends to be plumper. And that's partly just because of the fact that Lamora, who owns Access, is really super, attentive about what quality she's looking for in linen. And Zweigart, over the years, the quality of their linen is still good, but the quality of their linen has definitely not the same as it was 25 years ago. So whether it's Cashel or Belfast or any of those, it's still an excellent linen. It's just not quite as high a caliber is when, you know, I started 3 years ago. Well, actually longer ago than that, but yeah. So I don't think there are very few linens that I think of are really crappy linens, and if you find one, you'll know it. I mean, you'll stitch with it and you'll go, oh my God, I hate this. Now, some of that is because it might actually be a crappy linen, and some of that might be, it just doesn't work for you. No, you know, one of the reasons we carry so many different kinds of linens is no two people stitch on exactly the same thing. You can give 5 people a 28 count linen and they will not all 5 like it, and they might have very different reasons for why they don't like it, or they might all 5 love it. You know, it just kind of depends. Needlework is one of. Go ahead.
Someone just wanted to ask you about explain the 5260. I don't know what she meant by that. Cathe.
Oh, she might
what does that mean?
Know what that means. So most of the linens are woven so that the warp and the weft, the vertical and the horizontal, are the same count. So 28 count linen is the same this way, and it's the same that way. So for the uneven weave linens, which is what this is a 5260. There are 52 threads to the inch one direction. There are 60 threads to the inch the other direction. So this means it is an uneven weave linen. And if you stitched a square, if you stitched, say, 10 stitches across and 10 stitches down, your square will in fact be a rectangle. It will not be square, because it's depending on the direction you've oriented, it will either be wider or longer. So if you go back and look at samplers from 16th, 17th century in particular, a lot of those were done on uneven weave linens, not by design, but because that was what they had access to. So there are people who weave them in part because they're after that same kind of look that what you would have gotten from that time frame. And in some cases, it's because the linen in modern times is actually made as either an embroidery fabric or made as a fabric for actually doing household linens, or, you know, bedding, that kind of stuff from, and they're not really worried about the count. So it might be that the loom that they mill it on happens to be, that's what it turned out to be, and we like it, so that's what we have them, you know, run more of it. So kind of a variety of things. I mean, there are cases where that's happened, like Kingston, which is a fabric from Swagart. Kingston was always milled as an embroidery fabric, never as a counted fabric. And so over the 40 years I've stitched with it, it's probably been 6 or 8 different counts. It's never been even. You know, it's been 50, 52, it's been 50, 55, it's been, you know, 52, 54. It's varied over the years. And so a couple of years ago, several of us got together and asked them, could you make it even? Even if you just stuck it at 50, we'd be happy. And originally they said, well, we don't think we could do that, blah, blah, blah. We had enough coercion to get them to do the Bristol, which is 46 count even weave. Eventually they sent us an email about, I don't know, 6 weeks later, saying the guys in the mill actually kind of took it as a challenge, and they decided they could make an even weave 55, and it worked. And that's why we now have Kingston that's an even 55. So I've got some on the shelf that's 53, 59. I've got some that's 50, 55 from older mill runs. And then I've got newer stuff that's a 55, 55, meaning the warp and the weft are the same. So if you're doing small pieces, the uneven weave, you won't really notice it much. And if you're doing bigger pieces, you always just kind of want to know the orientation of it. For those people who are interested in fabrics and threads, and sort of particularly the denser stuff, we do a couple of silk samplings packs that are 37, 40, 45 count and appropriate threads. And then the 55, 52, 60 count and appropriate threads. I'm eventually going to add like 20 to 25 count and the 28 to say 32 count. I'm eventually going to do probably another 3 packs. I just haven't gotten them done yet. I'll give you, Gary, I'll give you the link to them.
Okay.
And they're a good way to play with, you know, different kinds of counts if you've not worked on something and you want to try something. And for the uneven weaves, we always mark the selvage. We put an S on the edge of the selvage so that when you get it, if it's not an even weave linen, you can decide which direction you want to turn it.
So
Yeah,
which is
Jennifer
the
just played with
selvage?
Jennifer
Yeah, I
just played
just
with
got
one
one
of your
of your
kits.
silk
Yeah.
sampling kits, and I played with it, and I
Stop
loved
talking
it.
same
It was
time.
awesome. And so the selvage is which number? The first number or the second number?
I'd have to go look it up because I don't remember off the top of my head. I think it's
Or the
usually the first one.
longest, or oh, okay.
Yeah,
Because
I
I
always
saw
have
the
to go
little
look it
S,
up
and
because
I'm
I
like,
can't
I don't
remember.
know.
Yeah, I think it's the first number, but I'd have to go look.
Yeah, I did. I
All right.
practiced with that and then I also practiced with DMC and an 80 weight cotton by Aurifil. It's like an
Yeah.
embroidery thread,
Yeah,
and
I have
so
some.
I played with those, and I really liked it. I like 45 count.
Yeah, then
I
the SWA 100 and the Saucer Fiend work really nicely on the 45 count.
Yeah, I love the 103. That's awesome too.
Yeah, so the 103 got a bunch of new colors recently, and the Saucer Fiend got about 35 new colors recently.
Oh wow.
So there's a lot
nice.
more Saucer Fiend colors. Yeah. Yeah, I pulled one of each of them out so that hopefully maybe sometime in the near future I can actually photograph them all. There aren't enough hours in the day for it all.
No, we do have another question. What count linen works best with NPI, Soie d'Agé, Bellswah, and would you ever use 2 strands?
Well, you can use 2 strands. It just depends on the count. So if you want to use a single strand, it's going to depend on what coverage you like. So if you like a plumper coverage, meaning if you're doing cross stitch and you don't want your X's to look sparse, then I would do 1 strand on 36, 35, 36 to 40. Not denser than that. I think it's too dense for me, but there are people who like it. If you want to use 2 strands, then I would do it at 28 and 32 and see which one you like. Some people like silk single strand on 32, and some people still like it as 2. Silk, unlike cotton, I mentioned this the last time, silk, unlike cotton, when you stitch with it, it will tend to unwrap a little. And that's not a bad thing. It's not like it really quite untwists, just sort of like, it's like a flower kind of opening. And so it gets a little plumper. Cotton doesn't do that. Cotton, once you've twisted it, it stays. It just doesn't come undone. So you can get away with 1 strand of silk on 32 if you like a medium to sort of medium dense coverage. If you want really dense coverage, you would want 2 strands.
I was curious. Nooper had a couple of questions here, really yes or no questions that I was curious about too. Can you buy emery in large quantities? And can you still buy wool felt, the maybe lanolin treated?
Yes, you can still buy, I think you can still buy emery. I know I bought some about a year ago. I bought bags of it. So I'm assuming I can still get it. I mean, I bought a bag that was, yay big and weighed like a pound. So I'm pretty sure I can still get it. And then what was the other question? I've now lost track.
Wool felt, or lanolin treated wool felt.
Well, wool felt normally, if the wool felt is really wool as opposed to it's felt, because those are kind of different. They don't normally take all the lanolin out of it. I don't know anybody who makes one that's got lanolin added to it. It's conceivable that might be out there. I've just never seen it. When the pages I make for my my Littlewood needle books, this is a 65-35, so it's 65% rayon, 35% wool. Because it holds up really well. You can get the 100% wool in wool felt. I get it in white. It doesn't come in very many colors. But yeah, certainly you can get it. The thing is that with the wool felt, when it's 100% wool, it tends to be a lot thicker. So like this page is like not even a 1/16 of an inch. It's probably less than that. If you buy the 100% stuff, it's almost twice as thick. You can get it, but as long as it's got some wool content in it, if you're using it for needle storage, then it's fine. I just don't generally make it out of the 100% rayon stuff, just partly because I don't like the feel, and partly because I want at least some amount of wool for my needles, because it at least helps them a bit. Yeah. And the only reason to use emery is if your needles are if the plating on your needles is tending to wear. And if that's the case, you might want to switch needles. So emery came into popularity in part because, 150, 200 years ago, needles weren't plated like they are now, and you had to periodically push them through something with emery to be able to get the crap off of them. Well, that doesn't happen with the plating that's on them now. You could actually just wipe it down with rubbing alcohol, and that would get any of your skin stuff off of it. So emery tends to these days be used more as just a thing to stick stuff in, as opposed to actually functional. There are some cases where you use it. The only wool felt things I actually have that are 100% that I keep a needle in is I have a handmade Japanese needle that I bought, 20 years ago, that's made out of steel. It's not a stainless steel. It's a flat needle, and I have to keep it in the wool felt and entirely embedded in the wool felt because it will rust otherwise. But that's because it's not plated.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends on the needle, but I find that the blend, the somewhat polyester, especially polyester, not rayon, that the 65-35 wool felt works well because there's enough wool content in it to be useful, but not so much that it's super thick.
Yeah.
But you can a lot of times find wool felt, even 100% wool felt at quilting stores, since there are so many people who use it for doing applique work. The best selection of 100% wool felt is usually found at a quilt shop.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Beth, did we have any more? I'd lost.
I think we got them.
We got them caught up.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think that's enough. I've tortured you enough.
All right, I think we will. I'll put everybody back on screen here. I think we will call it there. That was excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
Wonderful. Yep.
Great.
Now, next month, Cathe will be back a week earlier, the second Wednesday, because our tour with April from Sydney, Australia, which will be on quilting art, will be the third Wednesday of May, because April has things the first 2 weeks. So Cathe will be the second week next month, and then the third week will be our tour in Sydney with April on quilting. So that was a good time.
That'll be cool.
Yeah. Okay. I think we got them. Thanks so much, Cathe. That was fun. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Thanks for joining us.